Warning, this podcast contains descriptions of murder, torture and abuse. As a result, it may not be suitable for everybody. Perth, Australia, the capital and largest city of the Australian state of West Australia. It's Australia's fourth most populous city, with a population of 2.14 million living in Greater Perth. It's part of the Southwest Land Division of Western Australia, with the most metropolitan area on the Swan Coastal Plain between the Indian Ocean and the Darling Scarp. The city has expanded outward from the original settlements on the Swan River, upon which the city's central business district and port of Fremantle are situated. Captain James Stirling founded Perth in 1829 as the administration centre of the Swan River colony. Listen to the hometown murders of David and Catherine Birnie. They were an Australian couple from Perth. They murdered 4 women ranging in age from 15 to 31 at their home in 1986, and the attempted murder of a 5th. The crimes referred to at the press as the Moorhouse murders, after the Burnies' address at 3 Moorhouse Street in Willagee, a suburb of Perth. David and Catherine Birnie. David was born 16th of February 1951 and died the 7th of October 2005, and Catherine Birnie nee Harrison was born 23rd of May 1951. Both from Perth, Western Australia. They murdered 4 women and attempted murder of a 5th. David John Birnie was the oldest of 5 children. He grew up in the rural suburb of Wattle Grove, Western Australia. School friends and parishioners from Wattle Grove Baptist Church of the period reign remembered the family as having been dysfunctional. Rumours abundant about the family's promiscuity and alcoholism as they engaged in incest. When Birnie's parents asked the local priest to conduct their wedding ceremony, he expressed concerns about them as individuals and as a potential couple, broadly stating he felt theirs was a union that could never lead to any good. As an unusual and seemingly unsuitable pairing, the father was a man of very small stature and unattractive appearance, while the mother was known for her coarse manner, use of profanities and bad behaviour, often exchanging sexual favours with a taxi driver as payment for fares. David Birnie's school friends also commented that the family home was unkept and filthy, and the family never had regular meals together. His parents did not cook meals for the children. In the early 60s, Birnie's parents decided to move the family to another Perth suburb, where David met Catherine Harrison through mutual friends. At 15, David left school to become an apprentice jockey for Eric Parnham at a nearby Ascot racecourse. During this time there, he physically harmed the horses and developed a habit of exhibitionism. One night, David broke into the room of an elderly lady while he was boarding. He was naked with stockings over his head and attempted to commit his first rape. By this time, he was an adolescent. He was convicted of several crimes and was in and out of prison for misdemeanours and felonies. As an adult, he became a sex and pornography addict and paraphilic. He married his first wife during his early 20s, and the couple had a daughter, Tanya. Tanya was 10 years old at the time of his arrest. She was never married and had no children, stated, quote, "I don't want to spawn another David Birnie," end quote. Her surname is unknown to the media. In the late 1986, David Birnie was employed as a local car wrecker shop For more than a year, David and Catherine had been practicing how to make their sexual fantasies of rape and murder come true, while he was weeks away from committing his first crime. Catherine Margaret Birnie was born on the 23rd of May 1951. She was 2 years old when her mother Doreen died from giving birth to her brother, who died 2 days later. Unable to raise her, her father Harold sent Catherine away to live with her maternal grandparents. When she was 10, a custodial dispute resulted in Harold gaining sole custody of Catherine. At the age of 12, she met David Burnie, and by the age of 14, she was in a relationship with him. Harold begged Catherine on several occasions to leave David due to the fact that she was often getting into trouble with the local police. But his disapproval of their relationship only strengthened their union. Her time in prison throughout her adolescent years offered Catherine a chance to break away from David. Encouraged by a parole officer, Catherine began working for McLennan family as a housekeeper. She married David McLaren on her 21st birthday. She and McLaren had 7 children. Their firstborn son was struck and killed by a car in infancy. In 1985, she left her husband and 6 children and went to live with David. The couple were never legally married, but Catherine changed her surname by default to Burnie. Over a period of 5 weeks, the Burnies abducted 5 women aged between 15 and 31. All of the victims except for one were raped and murdered. The sole exception was their final victim, who escaped the day after her abduction and led police to the Burnie house. Thus, their crime spree ended. Mary Nielsen was 22 and studying psychology at the University of Western Australia and working part-time in a deli when she met David Birnie at a spare parts yard he worked in. David offered to sell her cheap tyres for a car and subsequently gave her his phone number. On the 6th of October 1986, she went to the Birnie's house. She was gagged and chained to the bed and raped by David while Catherine observed. She was taken to the Glen Eagles National Park near Albany Highway in Brentford Dale, where she was raped and strangled with a nylon cord. He then stabbed her, thinking he could speed up the decomposition as he read that a book somewhere, and they buried her in a shallow grave. She would have received her degree for psychology from the university 1 year after her murder. 2 weeks later, after the death, they abducted 15-year-old Susan Candy as she hitchhiked along Stirling Highway in Claremont, Australia. She was an outstanding student at Hollywood Senior High School and lived at home with her parents and siblings in Netherlands. Her father was one of the top ophthalmic surgeons in Western Australia. After she went missing, the Burnies forced her to send letters to her family to assure them that she was all right, but the family feared for her life. The Burnies had been cruising for hours looking for a victim when they spotted Candy. When she entered the car, she was held at knife point with her hands were tied together. She was taken back to the Willagee house where she was gagged, chained to the bed and raped. After Burnie had finished raping the girl, Catherine got into bed with them. She now knew that he'd turned David on. When they both assaulted her, Burnie tried to strangle the girl with a nylon cord, but she became hysterical. The Burnies forced sleeping pills down her throat to calm her down. Once Candy was asleep, David put the cord around the neck and told Catherine to prove her undying love for him by murdering the girl. Catherine complied with the demand and killed Candy while David watched. When asked later why she did it, Catherine said, quote, "Because I wanted to see how strong I was within my inner self. I didn't feel a thing. It was like I expected. I was prepared to follow him to the end of the earth and do anything to see that his desires were satisfied. She was a female. Females hurt and destroy males." End quote. They buried Candy near the grave of Mary Nielsen in the state forest. On the 1st of November, they saw 31-year-old Nolene Patterson standing beside her car on the Canning Highway. She had run out of fuel while on her way home from her job at bar manager at the Netherlands Golf Club. Once inside the car, she had a knife held to her throat and was tied up and told not to move. She was taken back to Moorhouse Street, where David repeatedly raped her after she was gagged and chained to the bed. The Birnies originally decided to murder her that same night, but David kept her prisoner in the house for 3 days, and there were signs that he had developed an emotional attachment to the Patterson. Catherine quickly became jealous and made an ultimatum. David would have to kill Patterson or Catherine would kill herself. He immediately forced an overdose of sleeping pills down Patterson's throat and strangled her while she slept. They took her body to the forest but buried her away from the others. Catherine reportedly got great pleasure from throwing sand on Patterson's face. On the 5th of November, the Birnies abducted 20-year-old Denise Brown as she was waiting for a bus at Stirling Highway. She accepted a ride from them and at knife point was taken to the house in Willagee, chained to the bed and raped. The following afternoon, she was taken to the Wananu pine plantation. In the seclusion of the forest, David Birnie raped Brown in the car while the couple waited for darkness. As they dragged Brown from the car, David Birnie raped her again and stabbed Brown in the neck. Convinced the girl was dead, they dug a shallow grave and laid her body in it, but Brown sat up from the grave. David Birnie grabbed an axe, struck her twice in the head and buried her body in the grave. 17-year-old Kate Moore was abducted at knife point, accepting a ride from the Birnies. Moore later stated she asked them if they intended to kill or rape her and was informed, "We'll only rape you if you're good." She was forced to dance for them and slept in the couple's bed while handcuffed to David. Moore was their final abductee and the only victim to survive. After abducting her, David held a knife to her throat and forced her to ring her mother. Moore assured her mother that she had too much to drink and was staying at a friend's house, hoping her mother would catch on to the ruse and call that friend, knowing she was not a drinker. She escaped the day after his capture. David went to work, Catherine went to the door to carry out a drug deal and forgot to chain Moore to the bed. She escaped by climbing through a closed window by breaking its lock, however she hit her head on the concrete. After knocking on various doors, she jumped a gate and was attacked by a dog. She managed to flee and ran into a vacuum cleaner shop on the 10th of November 1986. She later described herself as hysterical. "I'm barefoot, wearing my black leggings, a black singlet, knickers." She informed the shop owner she'd been raped. When the police arrived, she said she'd been abducted at knife point by a couple who'd taken her back to their house and raped her. The police initially was sceptical of her story, but 22-year-old Constable Laura Hancock believed her from the onset due to the amount of detail she provided, including their address and telephone number. The Birnies had given themselves aliases, but Moore had read David's name on a medicine bottle. Moore stated she watched the film Rocky on VHS and described the drawing she concealed in the house as proof of her presence. Subsequently, the police found her drawing in the house, as well as the VHS copy of the Rocky in Birnie's VHR. David and Catherine was arrested, and during their interviews they gave conflicting information. Catherine denied ever meeting Moore, while David insisted Moore had come to their house voluntarily to be engaged in consensual sex. Detective Sergeant Vince Ketch convinced David to confess and reveal where they had the bodies so they could be dug up before dark. David revealed there were 4 graves. There is speculation that the Birnies were responsible for the disappearance of Cheryl Renwick in May '86 and Barbara Weston in June '86 also. It also been suggested David was responsible for the disappearance of Lisa Marie Mott in 1980, however his first wife accounted for his whereabouts on the day of Mott's disappearance. When sent to trial, David Birnie pleaded guilty to 4 counts of murder and 1 count of each of abduction and rape. When asked why he pleaded guilty, he gestured toward the victim's family and said, quote, "It's the least I could do," end quote. He was sentenced to 4 terms of imprisonment for life. After being found sane enough to stand trial, Catherine Birnie was also sentenced to 4 terms of life imprisonment. Under the terms of law, both were required to serve 20 years before being eligible for parole.